Chapter 5. Two Spies. As Nancy went from panel to panel of the hall, tapping each one and listening carefully, Mrs. Holman came to her side. "I've never seen a sleuth at work," she said with a smile. "Show me how to do it." Nancy illustrated by laying her head against the wood and tapping softly with her fingers. As she finished listening to the woodwork on either side of the fireplace, Nancy sighed. "I'm sorry not to be able to show you what I mean. These walls are solid." Nancy glanced at her watch. There was still plenty of time for some investigating before the girls would have to leave for the Omega house. "Mrs. Holman, would you mind unlocking the door to the library? I'd like to tap the walls there." The housekeeper went for the key and inserted it into the padlock. As the two entered the room, Mrs. Holman looked around uneasily, but nothing had been disturbed. Nancy smiled. "Now," she said, "maybe I can show you what I mean." After a few minutes of work, she reported there were no hollow-sounding panels. The housekeeper frowned. "Then there's only one answer to the phantom getting in here. He must be a spook and come through the walls." Nancy knew there was no point in contradicting Mrs. Holman, but she was amazed that this intelligent person could possibly believe what she had just said. On a sudden hunch, Nancy went to look at the book titled The Roaring Twenties. As she opened it, the young detective looked grim. There were now only $140 instead of $150. Moreover, the bills had been moved to page 140. A thought which had been building up in Nancy's mind now became even more disturbing. The only person with a key to the padlock was Mrs. Holman herself. Was it possible that the housekeeper had invented the story of the phantom to cover up thefts of her own? "I just don't want to believe such a thing," Nancy told herself. "But I'm trying to solve this mystery for Mr. Rorick. I mustn't get soft-hearted and miss a clue." Hiding her feelings, she walked out of the library. After Mrs. Holman had locked it, Nancy said, "Would you do me a big favor?" The housekeeper smiled. "I'll be glad to if it's not too difficult." Nancy had decided to put Mrs. Holman to a test of honesty. "Oh, it's a very simple request. I'd like to borrow this key for tonight. After I get home from the dance, I may want to hide in the library and watch for the phantom." Mrs. Holman looked startled. "Do you think that's safe?" she asked. "Oh, I'll keep well hidden," Nancy replied. Mrs. Holman handed over the key. "Good luck. I'd certainly like to see this house rid of that spooky creature. He makes me so nervous." Nancy smiled, then started back upstairs to hide the key in her bedroom. "After we return from the dance," she thought, "I'll investigate the books with the money in them. If any more has been taken, or there's other evidence that someone has been in the room during the evening, it'll make Mrs. Holman's guilt unlikely. Of course," Nancy admitted to herself, "there's the possibility that she has another key." Just then the telephone rang. Nancy paused for a moment on the stairway to see if the call were for her. Mrs. Holman answered and almost instantly said, "Oh, no! Yes, I'll come at once." As the housekeeper put down the phone, Nancy asked, "Is something wrong?" "My niece, Jill Ball, was in an accident. She's in the hospital. Her husband wants me to come to his house tonight and take care of the children. Do you think you girls will be safe here alone? Oh, I hope the phantom—" Nancy expressed her sympathy and said the girls would be all right. Mrs. Holman gave Nancy the front door key. Within a few minutes, a taxi came for the housekeeper, and she left. Bess and George were ready by this time, and in a few minutes the boys arrived in a big car which they had rented for the evening. They drove to the Omega House, where the dinner party was being held. Finally, the couples began to leave for the university gymnasium. Nancy, Bess, and George and their escorts walked over together. As they entered the big building, Bess gasped. "What marvelous decorations!" she exclaimed. "How in the world could you boys ever think up anything so artistic?" Their 3 escorts pretended to be hurt. Dave remarked, "What makes you girls think you have a corner on the artistic market?" The apparatus in the gym had been entirely concealed with garlands of artificial roses. The center of the floor had been left free for dancing. Tables holding 6 to 12 had been arranged around 4 sides, with each 2 tables screened by lattice work also festooned with roses. "Your decorating committee deserves a big cheer," said Nancy. "I've never been to a dance with such pretty arrangements." The boys grinned. "Ladies," said Bert, "on behalf of Mr. Nickerson, Mr. Eddleton, and myself, I thank you." "Our achievement was nothing," Ned declared. "It was only great." Before the laughing girls could retort, there was a roll on a drum, the official announcement that the party had started. For nearly an hour, as broiled chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh peas, salad, and ice cream and cake were served, there was continuous laughter and joking. Finally, Bess remarked, "Please don't anyone else be funny. I've laughed so much I hurt all over." "Tell you what," said Dave, who was far from ready to be serious. "We'll take you to the infirmary and give you some laughing gas. Then it won't hurt when someone pulls a joke." Later, as Nancy was dancing with Ned, she told him of her early evening sleuthing, of the missing money, and her plan to make a search when she reached home. Ned said quickly, "I can't believe that Mrs. Holman is guilty." "I don't either," Nancy replied, "but you'll admit that I must try to find out. There is a possibility that she might even have had a Confederate phone this evening to throw us off the scent." Nancy went on to say that if the money had not been touched, she planned to spend the balance of the night hiding in the library to see if anyone entered it. Ned looked worried. "Nancy, I don't want you to do that alone. It's too dangerous. How about letting me keep watch with you? If the phantom comes, I'll give him the old football rush." Nancy hesitated before answering, but finally said, "Bess and George may be hurt if I don't ask them." "Don't worry about that," said Ned. "I'll talk to them." The dance number ended, and as they went back to the table, Ned called Bess and George aside and explained what he proposed. "It's a good idea," said Bess. "I'll feel safer with a man in the house. And no sleuthing for me tonight. I'm too tired." George liked the plan, but Nancy thought she detected a gleam of mischief in her friend's eye. "I'd better watch my step," Nancy thought. "George has some trick up her sleeve, I'm sure." It was in the small hours of the morning that the dance ended, and the 6 young people finally returned to the Rorick home. Bess suggested that they have a snack in the kitchen, and in a short time she was scrambling eggs and making toast and a huge pot of cocoa. When they finished eating, Dave threw out his arms and yawned. "I'm ready to call it quits. Any extra beds in this old house?" George said quickly, "I'm afraid not, but how about the floor? That's free." "Gosh, but you're hospitable," said Bert. "Just for that, I won't help wash the dishes." A few minutes later, Bert and Dave drove off. The others tidied the kitchen, then Bess and George went upstairs. Nancy opened the padlock on the library door, and she and Ned went inside. Before turning on the lights, she drew the draperies close together so no one could look in to see the searchers. This done, she went for the book, The Roaring Twenties. To her relief, the $140 was still on page 140. Next, she went to the volume The Roaring River. A $20 bill was gone, and the balance of the bills had been placed 20 pages lower. Nancy quickly picked out book after book with the word roar in the title. $10 had been taken from each of them, and the bills shifted to a page which corresponded to the remaining amount. "The phantom has been here!" Nancy exclaimed. Ned frowned. "I think the rest of the money should be removed from this room and put in the bank. It's certainly not safe here." Nancy agreed. Then Ned asked her if she had any theories as to who the phantom could be. "Surely not Mrs. Holman." "Probably not, but to make sure she wasn't faking, I'm going to call the hospital," Nancy said. She learned that Jill Ball was indeed a patient there. Her frantic husband was by her bedside, but the head nurse was very reassuring. Their children were being cared for by an aunt. "That completely exonerates Mrs. Holman," Nancy told Ned in relief as she came into the library and closed the door. "As far as a solution to the mystery goes, I'm right back where I started." "Well, I guess there's no use in our staying here any longer. I'm sure the phantom won't come back again tonight." As the couple gathered all the money and made notations on a pad of the amount taken from each book, Ned produced a theory. "Didn't it ever occur to you that Uncle John might be more than just forgetful?" "What do you mean?" Nancy asked. "I mean," Ned replied, "that Uncle John might be having a little fun at the expense of you girls. He probably has a duplicate key to this padlock." The young sleuth was astounded by the remark. "Uncle John?" she said. "I can't believe it. He didn't know until you telephoned him that we were coming here. According to Mrs. Holman, the mysterious happenings had been going on for a couple of weeks before that." Ned said it was possible Uncle John was having fun at Mrs. Holman's expense. A determined look came over Nancy's face. "There's an easy way to learn if he came here tonight," she said. "Tomorrow morning I'll find a pretense for phoning Uncle John at his college reunion and find out where he was tonight." Nancy asked Ned to put the roll of money into his pocket. Then the lamps were turned off and the draperies opened. As Nancy pulled aside one to a rear window, she cried, "The light! See it out there in the woods!" Ned could detect a small moving light among the trees near the river. "So that's the phantom," he remarked. "Come on, let's investigate," Nancy urged. As they hurried toward the door, they heard a low moaning sound. "Stand back!" Ned ordered Nancy. He whipped open the door and stepped into the hall. The next second, a hood was thrown over his head, and he was borne to the floor. End of chapter 5.